Tendenze future. Archetypal and galactic astrology presents the relevance of the outer planets on terrestrial affairs, a practical glimpse on the past and future. This short course presentation aims to introduce the concept of cosmic clocks in astrology. In short, we're talking about a galactic timer that seems to synchronize with the human psyche's evolution and with our personal and collective growth. In other words, the movement of the planets in the sky seems to have relevance on human affairs, in that planets and their related archetypes appear to act as maps of our becoming, development and growth. On a personal level, an astrologer, preferably with a psychological background and experience, is able to decipher the evolutionary map of the psyche by looking at how planetary transits and progressions, hence symbolic movements, activate one's birth planets. This is not about predicting the future, but it is instead about deciphering tendencies and gathering in which life area attention and growth is consciously required. What I am about to illustrate. In this brief course presentation, I will introduce the effects the outer planets seem to have on the psyche, but I will focus more specifically on how they correlate to planet Earth's and human collective affairs. This is known as mundane astrology. I will start by briefly introducing the concept of archetypes. I will then proceed by briefly explaining which concepts and archetypes seem to operate with the 5 outer planets. Outer means more distant, a planet whose orbit lies outside the asteroid belt. What I will also do is illustrate 3 possible reasons why astrology works, as seen from different angles, theories and analogies. This section cannot obviously be too lengthy. I will continue by having a look at which past events on planet Earth correlated with times when the outer planets were forming hard aspects with each other and their meanings. In the last section, I will discuss future transits and tendencies in terms of visiting which archetypes will be active in the current decade and beyond, in order to see how we can use such energies in the most constructive way. Let's begin. Happy reading and listening. Beginning with archetypes. Let's start by saying that Jung might have made the concept of archetypes popular, but he did not invent it. Plato talked about archetypes millennia ago, calling them forms. In short, the archetypes can be seen as universal patterns and models which influence human behavior. Jung sees them also as archaic forms of human knowledge inherited by our ancestors. In other words, archetypes are instinctive behavioral patterns, universal images and projections that are part of the collective unconscious, and it is from such archetypes that, according to Jung, we inherit certain forms of human reality. So what about specifically planetary archetypes? The simple answer is that there seem to be strong correlations between planetary movements, hence their archetypes and related characteristics, and human affairs, as well as the development and growth of the human collective psyche. This is the main theme of this presentation. Let's see why astrology works. Let's have a look at possible reasons why astrology works via 3 different lenses: psychology, physics, and philosophy. Via Carl Jung, psychoanalyst and astrologer, and his theory of synchronicities or meaningful coincidences. Via physicist and philosopher David Bohm and his theory of implicate order, according to which there is a hidden order underlying and organizing natural systems. Or by the ancient Buddhist metaphor of Indra's net, which illustrates how everything is interdependent and connected, hence, in Hermetic parlance, as above, so below. Don't tell me you believe in astrology, it's all hogwash. Lies that only gullible and superstitious people give credence to, trust me. This is how people who see themselves as knowledgeable criticize and pass judgment on a discipline they never even spent any time studying. This attitude is neither scientific nor enlightened, but typically ignorant and post-enlightenment, which contributes nothing to collective knowledge. I have at least studied astrology and tested it and seen it work hundreds if not thousands of times. Therefore, I am not impressed by such comments nor interested. What I am interested in, instead, is being useful in a practical way. This means that I have no problem admitting that I have no idea why astrology works. I just know that for some reason it seems to do so, and shows we're all cosmically connected. For the sake of argument, however, in this section I will briefly illustrate some potential reasons why astrology seems to work. Why should planets placed so far away have an effect on life on Earth, you might wonder? Let's try Jung's theory. Jung studied astrology seriously and used it to help his analyzers and patients. One of his relevant theories is known as synchronicity, or the theory of meaningful coincidences. In other words, Jung noticed that there seemed to be connections, meaningful coincidences, between our inner states and external situations. In the case of astrology, the event external situation is represented by the planetary transit, while the inner state is linked to the effect the planetary archetypes seem to exert on the human psyche, which indirectly informs decisions and events. Practical examples follow, not to worry. As an astrologer and keen observer, Jung did not miss such meaningful coincidences and correlations, whether science could explain them or not. Not convinced by psychology, huh? Not to worry, this section is brief, I hear you. We shall soon focus on practical examples. But let's try a different tack, using physics this time. In line with chaos theory, physicist and philosopher David Bohm discovered that a hidden order could be hidden behind all that which appears random. In other words, natural systems might appear random to our data-gathering instruments, but they in reality have a hidden implicate order that our instruments are simply unable to detect. This theory is not only compatible with quantum physics, but also with our inherited ancient spiritual knowledge. Hidden order in the cosmos still unconvincing? Okay, let's try one last time, using the theory of holograms, explaining the nature of reality in a symbolic way. One way to explain reality in metaphysics is to consider it as made up of the following three different components: energy, matter, and consciousness, each aspect containing the other two. In the Indra's net metaphor, the universe is compared to an enormous net, which extends into the infinite in all directions, protecting life in its totality without excluding anything. Indra's net, illustrating in the drawing, represents the interdependence and entanglement of all things in the whole universe. The metaphor reminds us that we are all connected in a kind of invisible net, that each person's actions influence the whole structure, and that invisible connections, like virtual waves, connect the whole cosmos in a subtle, no-local way, enabling exchange of information and experiences among all things by passing all obstacles and boundaries. To describe the nature of reality, in other words, one can use Indra's net and the analogy of the hologram. The all is one and the one is all, just like the hologram that contains the consciousness of the totality in each tiny part. In conclusion, and perhaps unsurprisingly, to describe the nature of astrological reality, one could use a well-known and ancient Hermetic principle that all could agree on: as above, so below. One of the three theories just illustrated should help comprehend the undeniable link between cosmos and psyche. However, if you have a different theory, please do post it on the internet so we can all learn something useful. In the meantime, however, I would let facts and historical events talk, which show that there has been a clear connection between the movement of the outer planets while they were in an aspect of tension with each other and the events that were happening on planet Earth at different times, which I will illustrate in the next section. Before briefly presenting planetary archetypes, let's revise what archetypes in general are and introduce mundane astrology. Archetypes can be seen as universal patterns that influence human behavior. Jung sees them as archaic forms of knowledge inherited by our ancestors. In mundane astrology, which is the astrology of the affairs of the collective on planet Earth, the planetary movements that interest us the most are cycles and the aspects which the outer planets form among each other. When Saturn, Uranus, Neptune and Pluto form aspects of tension, hard aspects with each other, conjunction, square, opposition, often humanity lives through a time of historic contraction, which inevitably introduces a new phase of radical change. Let's see what planetary archetypes are now. I do not claim to know who left us this wonderful discipline called astrology, although I have a few theories. What I do know, however, is that thanks to astrology, we do have a map that shows us our soul's project before incarnating. A horoscope shows the soul's plan for learning and development, what it wants to focus on in terms of lessons before incarnating, and it also shows us what to focus on, main traits, talents, stronger and weaker areas, and how to strengthen them. The planetary movements that activate the horoscope gift us with the map of our own growth, of our becoming throughout life, given the connection between cosmos and psyche we have been discussing. What becomes soon evident to all those who study the subject seriously is that there seem to be strong correlations between planetary movements, hence their archetypes and characteristics thereof, which will soon be discussed, terrestrial affairs, and the effects on our psyche and its development. The main theme of this presentation, as said, is not the effects of the archetypes on the individual psyches, but the connection between planetary movements and the things of the world. Okay, I think that the connection between cosmos and psyche has been underlined sufficiently, and we can now move on to discuss details. Now, before proceeding with the historical events correlated to the planetary movements, we need to establish briefly which are the outer planets, those farther away from us, and which are their respective archetypal meanings. Jupiter, the great benefic, known for its preference for expansion, luck and growth, but also for exaggeration and for running risks not always carefully calculated. Then there's Saturn. It solidifies and manifests, but it also contracts, concretizes and sometimes limits, emphasizing the need to be practical and realistic. Uranus stands for awakening, revolution, changing the status quo, technology, innovation, liberation, and idealism. Neptune stands for dissolution, vision, empathy, spirituality, and creativity, sacrifice, idealization, and illusion. Then there's Pluto, which stands for transformation, rebirth, destruction of the old and obsolete, depth and the ability to dig into the depths of one's psyche, revelation of corruption, and secrets. Let's now revisit these archetypal planetary meanings, beginning from gigantic Jupiter. Jupiter is the great benefic, known for its propensity for expansion, fortune and growth, but also for its exaggeration, linked to running risks and tempting fate at times. Jupiter could contain planet Earth 100 times, a supergiant indeed. Saturn is a magnificent-looking planet. It solidifies and manifests, but it also restricts, concretizes, and limits, emphasizing the need to focus on being sensible and practical, keeping one's feet on the ground at all times. Uranus is a planet with a very unusual orb. It rolls around on its side as it circles the Sun. It is linked to awakenings, revolution, evolution, drastic and apparently sudden changes to the status quo. Uranus rules technology, innovation, liberation, and idealism. Neptune is a mystical planet. It is linked to dissolution, vision, sensitivity, empathy, spirituality, creativity, sacrifice, loss, idealization and illusion, as well as, unfortunately, self-deception. Then there's Pluto, which has been demoted by astronomers and is now a dwarf planet, but it has certainly never been demoted by astrologers, being still the most powerful planet in terms of effects. Pluto is small but potent. It stands for transformation, rebirth, fearless destruction of all that is obsolete. It is known for its depth, the ability to dig deep within the psyche, revealing and exposing corruption and secrets in its wake. Let me remind you again that in mundane astrology, which studies earthly affairs, the planetary movements we are particularly interested in are cycles and the aspects that the outer planets form to each other. We will shortly see that Saturn wants to maintain the status quo, while Uranus revolutionizes and frees, and Pluto destroys, reveals what is corrupt, and is keen on transforming. And also that, as said, particularly when Saturn, Uranus and Pluto form hard aspects to each other known as conjunction, square and opposition, often humanity has to live through a period of historic contraction, which inevitably leads to a new phase of radical changes. This is what we will be facing in the next few years, no doubt about that. What I am referring to are times characterized by revolutionary activities of intense emancipation, accompanied by attempts at repression and control from above, from the powers that be, that is, as a conservative reaction designed to preserve the status quo. The problem is, however, that imposing repression often creates extreme tension, which only accentuates the crisis, bringing about revolutions and more dramatic solutions. One such phase has been and still is the COVID-19 so-called pandemic, which we all know and have been going through since early 2020. Astrologically speaking, we lived through an emergency red alert phase when Saturn and Pluto were squaring Uranus, which went on until 2021. The truth of the matter is that there have been increasingly clear signs that some pretty big global changes are ahead, are unavoidable and necessary. This should give us the courage to change our lives and transform a world in serious crisis, but peacefully if possible. What seems to be a problem, however, might be the lack of awareness on a collective level. A lot of people prefer to keep avoiding facing the problems that stare them in the face, keeping purposefully aware of what has been motivating world governments, which is not people's well-being clearly. Ignorance is bliss, hardly, if I may say so. Moving on, before we close this chapter, let's examine a few of the positive aspects which the COVID-19 crisis has highlighted. Here are some of the lessons COVID has gifted us with. Avoiding wasting time on people who have been calling friends but are not. Let's be more selective or less hypocritical and simply choose new friends. Say goodbye to a kind of empty consumerism which feeds a sick system and poisons the planet, emptying our pockets unnecessarily. Let's buy just what we need and learn to produce and create more of what we ultimately consume. Just one option. Learn to spend, save and invest money in a much wiser, more knowledgeable way. Let's open our eyes to the fact that the media rarely gives us the truth. It is time to look for and find information channels which are not politically controlled by a sick system that wants to control humanity. Let's start taking responsibility for the consequences of our actions or inactions without falling into the trap of blaming others for our own choices, shall we? Well then, necessary introductions taken care of, we can finally move on to having a closer look at the effects on the psyche and on the collective when the outer planets make hard aspects to each other. Let's begin. Facts and history seem to show that when two planets in particular form a hard aspect to each other in mundane astrology, really hard times appear to correlate on Earth and humanity suffers. These two planets are Saturn and Pluto, as we will shortly see. It is not by coincidence that the outer planets are also known in astrology as the gods of change. After the transits, nothing stays the same after all. Before listing a few examples of such correlations and what happened on Earth when Saturn and Pluto were in hard aspects to each other in the sky, it is worth repeating some keywords associated with the outer planets. What we'll also see is that the planetary archetypes they represent do not necessarily stand for trouble. What is needed is more awareness so that their energy can be used more constructively in the future, hopefully. I'll offer some keywords again so we can get familiar with these planets. Saturn is conservative and wants to preserve the status quo. Uranus wants freedom and revolution to innovate, while Pluto transforms, reveals what is obsolete or corrupt, destroys and renews on healthier foundations. Let us now list a few of the tragic events which took place on planet Earth when the outer planets formed hard aspects to each other, as mentioned before. Saturn was opposing a conjunction between Uranus and Pluto during the Vietnam War, the revolution in China, and similar events in different areas of the planets, including South America, between 1964-67 and 1968. Saturn and Pluto were conjunct in Cancer during the First World War. They were conjunct in Cancer, which stands for family, and many families were indeed destroyed, alas. Saturn, Uranus and Pluto were again in hard aspect during the Great Depression, the terrible crisis in 1932. In 1939, when Saturn was squaring Pluto, the Second World War took place. The same two planets, Saturn and Pluto, were conjunct again in Leo this time, the sign of leadership during the Cold War between nations intent on imposing their supremacy. The recession of 2008, with Saturn, Uranus and Pluto in hard aspect, left many people destitute. Saturn and Pluto were also in hard aspect in the years 2018-2021, hence throughout the COVID pandemic, which affected the whole world. Hardly a coincidence. Is there anybody out there now who still wishes to call them coincidences? Yes, I can hear your thoughts, and I know that a question inevitably comes to mind now, and that is, are the outer planets, the gods of change, simply prophet of doom? Do they cause terrible events, or are they allies? What is trying to happen during such transits, in truth, is that something new is trying to emerge and be born. But the resistance to this energy from those who are trying to preserve an obsolete and inefficient status quo, Saturn, holding on to a real or imagined control and power over people, Pluto, plus the rebellion and reactions driven by a thirst for a new dawn and evolution, Uranus, is what causes all the mayhem. It is this tension and the decisions made by the powers that be based thereon that cause the pain. However, it is known that what you resist persists. It just won't go away. Saturn used to be known in ancient times as the Great Malefic, but its reputation is now more psychologically sophisticated. It is true that often its transits seem to coincide with apparent obstacles to progress, delays, sacrifices, and the need for great realism, but it is also true to say that sometimes it is by focusing intently on a problem that solutions that are solid in the long run are found. For this reason, Saturn's stability is something to be cherished rather than feared. Pluto stands for a very powerful raw energy rising from the depths of one's unconscious, sometimes hiding a huge potential, which manifests with enormous power in order to transform radically both people and situations. Not much is left unchanged after Pluto. A lot is destroyed and transformed in order to bring about a rebirth on much healthier foundations. The thing is that human beings are creatures of habits, and exceptions aside, they really don't like changes unless such changes are initiated by them on their own terms and in their own time. Life, however, does not work like that, and change is the only constant in life, whether we like or whether we don't. Thank God for that, or we would risk stagnation otherwise. The point is, therefore, that the outer planets in hard aspect with each other do not necessarily bring about wars, tragedies, and misfortunes. Those are only the consequences of ignorance-driven choices made by people who are blinded by their thirst for power and by their lack of awareness of their real origins, of their purpose in life, of their potential. The prevalence of a form of spirituality which still fails to endow human beings with true power and full awareness of their true nature and connection with the cosmos hardly helps. We're talking about religions, of course. So it is ignorance and thirst for power over others that creates division, hatred, wars, and grave limitations to the wonderful human potential still waiting to emerge and blossom. Certainly not the outer planets. Before we move on, let's see one last example of global tendencies and decisions made when the outer planets were in hard aspect with each other, highlighting times of crisis a few centuries ago this time. The period between 1705 and 1716 saw the emergence of the Industrial Revolution, during which people turned their backs on nature and left the countryside. This happened in a different cycle, during which many problems were created for humanity, the consequences of which we're still facing today. Humanity now needs to not only find a balance between the masculine and feminine aspects of the psyche, but to also devise new ways of living and cultivating in a sustainable way, respecting nature and the planet that hosts us. New tendencies and innovative solutions have been emerging, such as biomimicry, nature-inspired, sustainable innovation. Thank heavens, many people have been working on revisiting humanity's attitude towards nature, trying to find practical solutions to ancient problems, going back to cooperating with a loving planet Earth. Better late than never, I'd say. So before ending this chapter, this was an example of a constructive use of the planetary archetypes, transformation and rebirth, Pluto, and rebuilding on solid foundations, Saturn. Far from doom, isn't it? The teaching here is that the developmental arc of the archetypal cycles might span centuries, but it always aims towards justice and fairness in the long run. So let's keep hopeful. The present and the future. After having seen how past hard transits correlated to past events on Earth, we can now move on and try to understand how the planetary archetypes active in the present and future are trying to enlighten us, especially around the current decade of 2020-2030. It has to be said that in this post-COVID era, much remains to be done to create a balance. I foresee much change in the years to come, but unlike many, I am firmly convinced of a bright future and destiny ahead for the new generations, a new humanity. I am confident a new Earth is trying to be born, and that future generations will live in a much better and very different world than the present dysfunctional one. In the meantime, while the gods of change continue their mission by activating the archetypes of change, here is a partial but relevant picture of what is happening in the sky in the current decade spanning 2020-2030. To recap again, Saturn wants to preserve the status quo, while Uranus revolutionizes and frees, Neptune dissolves illusions, and Pluto destroys, reveals corruptions, and transforms. Pluto is in Capricorn until 2024. Before proceeding, let's clarify one thing. Pluto, the archetype of destruction of the old and obsolete, of revealing unpleasant truths, corruptions and abuse, and of rebirth, is in the sign of Capricorn, which represents our institutions until 2024. What this implies is that while Pluto reaches the last few degrees of Capricorn, its evolutionary forces are and will be very busy taking down an old and corrupt system which can no longer be sustained, so I would expect harsh and very uncomfortable truths to be revealed and to emerge in the next few years. What we're likely to continue seeing globally in the meantime are desperate attempts to preserve the status quo on the part of corrupt institutions still in power. A most pathetic and sad spectacle, I'm sure you'll agree. In the meantime, Neptune in Pisces is continuing its dissolution of illusions, gradually revealing the extent human folly has reached generally during the so-called pandemic and what humans are really capable of, negatively speaking, especially when following the masses. Historia docet, history teaches. And Uranus in Taurus has been creating problems to global economies, with more to come in the next few years. Jupiter and Saturn have recently initiated a new cycle of 200 years of transits in air signs, most likely the official beginning of the age of Aquarius, which will finally put an end to rampant and thoughtless materialism and hierarchies based on old empires in the years to come. All this is destined to change and to make space for a new world. Interestingly, the square between Saturn and Uranus, which has been active for a while, so far seems to have made more space to the repression of Saturn than to the revolutionary energy of the archetypes of Uranus. However, with the nodal axis, North and South Node in Taurus Scorpio in aspect to Uranus, I most definitely expect the more typical revolutions and rebellions of the archetype of Uranus to increasingly prevail in the near future. Uranus is represented by Prometheus, the Titan who was humanity's friend in that he stole fire from the gods to give it to humans, challenging their powers, and a raging Zeus, who proceeded to punish him. Prometheus has often symbolized rebellion against authority and suppression, the fight for justice and progress, and in the same way, so is a transit of Uranus destined to bring a new concept of freedom on Earth in the years to come. Taking stock of where we are today. While Saturn interacts with Uranus 2021 and 22, we're literally at a turning point where the past meets the future with great force. We would be wise if we consciously implemented greatly needed, necessary and rapid changes to our institutions and to the way we organize and lead our everyday lives. If we don't do that, we will run the risk of facing apparently sudden breaks or blocks, while dysfunctional structures might suddenly collapse. We would be wise if we brought together what is still valid from the past with what is promising for the future in all areas of our lives. What seems to be absolutely necessary for the current decade, in short, are deep structural changes all round to be implemented in the very near future. We shall see, but somehow I doubt that such changes will be willingly taking place as a result of peoples from all over the world joining forces and demanding more justice and wisdom from their leaders. Changes seem more likely to happen as a result of very serious crises taking place in a series of countries in the next few, no doubt, difficult years. One factor which is interesting to highlight and point out is that in the current decade, Uranus, Neptune and Pluto will all be changing signs, and whenever that happens, the energies, the focus on earthly affairs and human needs, seem to undergo changes too. In fact, in 2023-24, Pluto will be entering the sign of Aquarius, an air sign. In 2025, Uranus will be entering Gemini, another mental air sign, while Neptune will move into the fire, proactive sign of Aries. What does this mean in practical terms, and how does it affect us? I would say that this means it is reasonable to deduce the following. The key moments of the changes facing us during the current decade seem more likely to take place around mid-decade, when the outer planets change sign and when Saturn and Neptune both enter the sign of Aries, which we're about to discuss. When Neptune and Saturn are aligned, in this case they will be conjunct, history teaches us that what tends to happen is that humanity goes through a period of disillusionment when part of the system actually collapses. This became evident during the last conjunction between these two planets, which took place in 1989, followed by the conjunction between Uranus and Neptune in the sign of Capricorn, signifying institutions and the status quo, which brought about an important restructuring of the Soviet Union and the fall of the Berlin Wall. Interestingly, the conjunction between Saturn and Neptune taking place in 2025-26 seems to mark the end of a long cycle which began in 1989. In short, what I would be inclined to expect is for the West to be currently and in the near future undergoing its own process of change. In other words, a real cultural revolution seems to be at hand. Considering that the conjunction will take place in the quarrelsome sign of Aries, let's just hope that the restructuring of the West will not need to take place following fighting or wars. What I would also expect, to be honest, is for the dominion of the West over the rest of the world to simply cease, together with the collapse of the old materialist paradigm, finally freed from hierarchical structures based on huge empires, so that we can finally make space for something much more decentralized, connected, and far more human at last. What seems also obvious to expect, perhaps, is for technocrats, corporations, and all those who profit from the current system to not let go without fighting. And that is where the real danger for humanity lies, as I see it. Much depends on how long the fight and the opposition to the winds of change will last, while the old institutions and powers hang on tightly to a system that will slowly be crumbling nonetheless. They are so spiritually blind that they are perfectly capable of unleashing another world war to keep the status quo intact. Personally, I doubt that another world war will ever take place, because I am convinced that our very human folly would be stopped by higher transdimensional intelligences, considering that the repercussions would affect the rest of the galaxy and not just planet Earth. As to when the last blow to the Western supremacy based on endless consumerism seems likely to take place, I would expect that to happen after the conjunction between Saturn and Uranus in Gemini in 2032. In the meantime, however, in the years 2022 and 23, we are likely to have financial difficulties, civil unrest, and important reforms. I will not lie and also reveal that just after that, when Pluto enters the sign of Aquarius in 23-24, I expect further international trauma to be faced, following some very unsavory truths regarding the way the COVID pandemic was globally managed. Whose interests were really at stake, we shall see. In 2024, I would expect also a new beginning, a new chapter also when it comes to finances, when Jupiter and Uranus will be conjunct in Taurus, the sign of money. Speaking of which, I would also not discount the possibility of developments regarding a new digital currency, Uranus in Taurus. To sum up, then, with Saturn in Pisces in 2023, which will change sign and conjoin Neptune in Aries in 2025, while Uranus moves into Gemini, it is easy to deduce that the dissolution of the old powers will continue mercilessly for the next few years. What else? I find the square aspect between Saturn and Pluto in 28-29 interesting, as the structures and institutions created at the beginning of the current decade will be put to the test. It is not guaranteed that they will pass such tests. Let's put it this way. Slowly but surely, we will have reached the year 2032, when conservative Saturn will be in aspect with evolutionary Uranus. By then, the old powers should have let go of their control and given up. However, if the old and corrupt institutions all over the world have managed to still be standing and holding on to power by then, considering how difficult it is to let go of all the advantages and benefits they have unquestionably grown accustomed to, we will have to wait 2 other cycles, which will definitely overturn any past reality that may have survived. We are looking at Saturn opposition Pluto, 2034-35, Uranus opposition Pluto 2046-48. I feel certain that we will be free before then, but if all goes wrong, at least in a worst-case scenario, it is good to know we will be given another chance. This means that by 2048 at the latest, but hopefully within 2032 really, everything will have changed, or at least it should, especially in the West, whose supremacy will be a thing of the past, and there will be, one hopes, cooperation among different nations. I seriously doubt that the United States, the United Kingdom, and the European Union will be left untouched by this cosmic tsunami, and I foresee great changes all over the world, China included. In conclusion, all we can do is hope that more wisdom will inspire all world governments, and that the post-COVID disaster still unfolding will shortly succeed in opening the eyes and touching the consciences of the heart and hearts of those heads of states and governments who have blindly followed those who wield the real occult power, without using any wisdom or integrity to rule in an honest way, failing to protect people's interests, as they should have done. An honest government that cares for its peoples is what we all want, should have had, and will have in the future, I feel certain. It will take a while longer, though. As for me, I have great thirst and hunger for justice, and for a new world based on equality, freedom, honesty, and love of nature and cooperation among all people. And I am sure I'm not the only one. So be it, and so it shall be if we all play our part, finally refusing to believe or accept the media's manipulations and lies designed to suppress people's freedom and right to self-determination. Summary without astrological details and conclusions. In conclusion, and to sum up, the main message of the outer planets, the gods of change, in this presentation is that change is the only constant in life. Let's revisit, to summarize, the general indications regarding future tendencies I have been discussing and what we can expect in the present and near future, but this time without citing any astrological details in order to have a clearer picture. This is a difficult time of historic contraction, which inevitably introduces a new phase of radical changes. Something new is trying to be born, and this phase will be characterized by revolutionary activities. It is a time of intense emancipation, of disillusionment and collapse of part of an old, unsustainable system. This is likely to come with efforts to create order and control by suppression and repression from above, on the part of those who intend to preserve the status quo at all costs. These are times of destruction, transformation and rebirth, therefore, and they are accompanied by inevitable rebirth and reconstruction on more solid foundations. The West has been going through a process of restructuring, its own cultural revolution, and it has been losing the supremacy it has enjoyed for the past new decades. With the end of the Western dominion over the world, it is probable that the collapse of the old materialistic paradigm will also manifest. Therefore, we can only hope Earth's rebirth and restructuring will take place in and give birth to a far healthier world. Throughout 2022 and 2023, we are likely to witness financial crisis, civil unrest, and some important reforms too. The revelation and emergence of some inconvenient truths which have been hiding behind the handling of the COVID pandemic on a global level can also be expected, and it is likely to unmask which corrupt institutions have not been acting to protect Earth people, being motivated only by their own thirst for money, control, and power. Nothing new, alas. In 2024, there might well be a new beginning, a new chapter also in world finances. There might even be news regarding a new digital currency. The dissolution of the old powers will continue tirelessly in the next few years, but the real turning point is more likely to take place around mid-decade. Technocrats, corporations and all those who have the most to gain, the greatest benefits, from the current system will hardly give up their power without fighting, and we might have to face some really dark moments. But let's not lose hope, as what is emerging is a rebirth, and sometimes things just have to get worse before they get better. All this is likely to happen within the end of 2032, or if all else fails, within 2048 at the latest. It is not that far away. The USA, the United Kingdom, the European Union, China, and all other countries are likely to be profoundly affected by this wave of changes and archetypal and cosmic tsunami. We can only hope that the world governments, especially post-COVID, will also change and evolve and will cease to be in the hands of corrupt leaders who follow the interests of occult powers working against humanity's well-being. We all need and deserve to be led by wise leaders who operate with integrity in the interest of the people they're supposed to serve. Let's hope that will come about as well at last. Let's not forget that archetypal cycles might be very long and might take many years to unfold, but they inevitably always aim towards the creation of justice and fairness in the long run. Never lose hope that the hidden greatness within the human spirit will emerge eventually, even if in the nick of time. The outer planets, the gods of change, are on our side after all. What we have left to do now is to take care of our own personal evolution in order to evolve planet Earth, our mother, too. Psychological, archetypal and galactic astrology consultations available in English and Italian via Skype or Zoom by Patrizia Trotta, PhD. Information on www.tendenziefuture.org. Email tendenziefuture@gmail.com. Thank you for listening, and I wish you all the best of luck.